Hello. So I posted a couple of days ago on a community post a new pre birth memory. Well, it's not new to me, but it's a new episode of this individual that I had listened to and even spoken to a few years ago. And since I had recently gotten into pre birth memories a little bit, I thought that his story was very fascinating. I don't remember exact details, but to summarize, basically, he was in this heavenly realm, right? And he was informed by a guide that because he was unable to overcome his fear in his previous life, apparently he had serious issues with fear and anxiety, and that fear supposedly led him to a very painful death. And then that painful death had him, return to the realm where he is now informed that he should be given another opportunity to overcome said fear, whatever that is. Now, he describes the process of going into Earth in a similar fashion that other pre-birth memories had, also related to water. There was always something related to water, which I think is really interesting and fascinating. But he said that in this process, you go into this kind of chamber-like room, and this specialized room lowers your frequency and vibration to the point where you are able to inhabit a human body, I guess. And on top of it lowering your vibration, it actually, in addition to that, wipes your memory, or in this process, it causes you to forget who you truly are. So long story short, there was a bunch of questions asked. I shared this interview. It was really good. He was even asked if we're forced to reincarnate. And he said no. He said he had a really complex and interesting answer to this question, which you ought to check out yourself, where he states that there's certain versions of the self that may sort of force itself to do so, but the soul as a whole is always sovereign. It's quite complicated, and I don't want to get into it right now. But he was asked what was the purpose of life. That was especially fascinating. I really meditated on this. He said that the purpose of life was the expansion of love. Now, the expansion, remember, for those of you that were in the live stream the other day, if there is an expansion, where is the expansion going to, right? From what perspective are you thinking of as being an expansion? Because in the realm of the absolute, there is nothing to expand. Everything is eternally expansive and internally expansive with no context in between, just being basically subsequently all the same, meshed into one. So if he's speaking of expanding love in terms of creation itself, where creation sprouts as in germinated seeds in the cosmos that are seated in darkness, and if it sprouts in that darkness and expands after that, then I can kind of make sense of what he's saying. You start off in darkness and you grow towards the light. You expand towards the light. That sort of makes sense to me, and it's a common analogy to use the seed because it makes sense to use a seed and a plant for this analogy, because when a seed is in the ground, it is surrounded by darkness. But once it sprouts, it becomes filled with light because it sees the sun. Obviously, I'm not talking about the sun for us in this case, unless you worship the sun, which I don't. Then it sort of makes sense. But in terms of the overall purpose, the absolute purpose of life, in general, in all contexts, in all forms, in all creation, I would not describe that as the expansion of love. I would describe that as the reconfiguration of love, restructuring of love. So if all creation ultimately returns to love, then it's not expanding, it's expanding then contracting. But why does it contract? It contracts because it is recreating itself into another version of how we could represent that love. Or the deeper in the darkness that it goes, the harder it is to pull out of it, but it pulls out, it always does. I mean, that is it restructures, it recreates a new idea of how to return to the love, basically. The process, it's complex though, because as we discussed in the live stream, there's no frame of reference. It's infinitely large as it is infinitely small. It doesn't technically expand into anything. It doesn't expand anywhere. It's all here all the time. So in this eternal now moment, it's always recreating its return to love, basically. in a multitude of different ways, in quadrillions of different ways, countless that we can't even comprehend, through each individual being, each planet, each galaxy, each universe is all an expression of pulling out into that darkness to return itself back into the light. And each time it expands out and germinates the darkness, it does it in a unique way. That's why no two flowers are alike. That's why no snowflakes are alike. That's why no two universes are alike, no two galaxies are alike. And in the infinite now, there is infinite variation, and no two things are technically alike, even in the infinite now, because it's infinitely shifting and changing. So interesting. So is love expanding, or is it recreating, regenerating? Regenerating is another word you can use. Interesting to think. I don't know. It does bother me a little bit that, he didn't overcome some fear. Keep in mind, I did a live stream on the gradients of fear. There is a completely big difference between fear and absolute terror. Uncontrollable flight or flight terror. And it seems like this realm that we live in, every single generation has this, as a situation in which absolute terror exists. A war there, personal life, all kinds of things. Or does that still fall into the category of regular fear? I mean, I don't know. So what? I'll tell you this. I'm not exactly a fan of reincarnation, just so you know. Even though I've been more open to it, I used to be completely closed off to it, by the way. This is not even something that was on my radar. It was not an idea I liked, because I do not want to come back here either. And I don't think it works the way that we think it does anyway, honestly. It's probably very different than we perceive it to be. Not all things are meant to be known. So let's just say if the world plunges into absolute terror, and we have to live through a third world war, and there's just things that are just too difficult. And I mean, there's a saying in the Bible that says God will never give you anything more than you can't handle. Possibly that is true. I mean, that's not something how do you quantify something like that? Handle how? If you can't handle it, then you'll literally just die. I mean, it's as simple as that, if you can't handle it. But if we're going to be going through that, and then I come back, and some guide tells me, hey, remember World War III? You didn't overcome that terror, that absolute sheer terror. What's up with that? You got to go back. I will personally take my hands and shove him into the Earth portal and make him go through it. So I'm just saying, I don't care. I'll tell him, man. I'm like, hey, you do it. Then come back and then we can talk. All right. Anyway, wow. Oh my gosh, 14 minutes. I'm so sorry. I wish I had my electric guitar here so I could blast some really loud metal, but we gotta be all calm and peaceful here.